There is a hidden power in a revenge that is served with a velvet touch and a steady, unwavering hand. Witness the smooth, calculated path of those who finally took back what was theirs. Hit subscribe now and see the ultimate price of a broken promise.
The night I found out my brother had been renting out my apartment while I was 3 states away, I was sitting in a hotel room in Denver eating sad vending machine crackers and answering work emails. My phone buzzed. A stranger's review on Airbnb. 1 star. The host was unresponsive and the unit smelled like cigarettes. The listing photo was my kitchen. My yellow kettle was on the counter. I bought that kettle at a flea market in 2019 for $6 because it made me happy. I sat there for a long time just staring at it. My brother's name is Wade. He's 34. He has always been the kind of person who borrows things and forgets to tell you. A phone charger. $20. Once, my car for an entire weekend when I thought it was in the parking garage. That's Wade. Our parents used to laugh it off. That's just how he is. I stopped laughing around the time he was 31 and still just how he was. I'm 29. I work in cybersecurity consulting. I travel a lot, which is exactly what Wade was counting on. I bought my apartment 2 years ago. It took me 4 years to save for the down payment. I ate rice and beans twice a week. I didn't go on vacation. I canceled subscriptions I actually wanted. I have a spreadsheet, yes, an actual spreadsheet, where I tracked every dollar from the month I decided I was going to buy property until the day I signed the papers. My mother called me obsessive. I called it a plan. The apartment is a 2-bedroom in a city with a good rental market, and yes, one of the reasons I bought it was as an investment. But it was my investment, mine. When I travel for work, which can be weeks at a time, I have a neighbor, an older woman named Gloria, who takes my mail and waters the single plant I own, a pothos that has survived despite every odd against it. I do not sublet. I do not allow guests. It's in my lease agreement with myself. Basically, I own the unit, but the building has HOA rules, and one of them is no short-term rentals without board approval. I had been in Denver for 11 days when that Airbnb notification landed on my phone. Let me back up. 3 weeks before I left for Denver, Wade called me asking if he could crash at my place for a few days while I was gone. He said his girlfriend was repainting their apartment and the fumes were bad. I said no, but in the gentle, apologetic way I'd been trained by years of being the younger sister to say no. Lots of, I'm sorry, and it's just not a good time, and zero firmness. He pushed back. I held the line. Eventually, he said, fine, whatever, and hung up in the way he hangs up when he wants you to feel guilty about it. I thought that was the end of it. I left for Denver. Day 3, I texted Gloria to check in. She said everything was quiet. Day 7, same thing. I relaxed. Then day 11, the Airbnb notification. I want to describe what happened to my body when I saw that photo of my kitchen. It wasn't anger. Not at first. It was more like the floor dropped out. That specific sick feeling when something impossible is happening and your brain keeps insisting on the impossibility even while your eyes are reading evidence of the contrary. I kept scrolling. There were 6 photos. My living room. My bathroom. The second bedroom I use as an office. My pothos, inexplicably, had been moved to the windowsill in the office and looked better there than it ever had on the bookshelf, which somehow made everything worse. The listing had been live for 9 days. It had 3 completed bookings. The nightly rate was $120. I did the math. I sat there with my sad crackers and I did the math, and then I put the crackers down because I couldn't eat anymore. I didn't call Wade. That impulse came and I let it pass. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I deal in evidence, documentation, and patience. Calling Wade in that moment would have accomplished 2 things. Let him know I knew, and given him time to scrub the listing before I could screenshot everything. I am very good at not doing the thing that feels good in favor of doing the thing that works. I took screenshots of everything. The listing, the reviews, the host profile. The host profile had a name I didn't recognize, some variation of Wade's middle name and a fake last name, but the profile photo was his, just cropped differently. He'd used a photo from a family Christmas 3 years ago where I'd actually taken the original. I was cropped out of my own photo being used to scam strangers in my own apartment. I forwarded everything to my personal email and my work email, and I saved it to my cloud storage with a timestamp. Then I opened my notes app and started writing down everything I remembered about the conversation where he'd asked to stay and I'd said no. Time. Date. Rough transcript of what I remembered. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then I called my building manager. Her name is Denise. She is 61 years old. She has worked in property management for 30 years, and she once told me she can spot an unauthorized sublet from a mile away by the pattern of package deliveries. I loved Denise. I told her what I'd found. There was a pause on her end, and then she said flatly, "How many bookings?" I told her 3 completed, possibly more in progress. She said, "I'll pull the entry log." Our building has a digital key fob system. Every entry is logged with a timestamp. Denise pulled the log for the past 9 days, and there were 17 entries on my unit's key fob that had not been made by my fob. Wade had made a copy, or he'd used my spare. My spare was in the little ceramic dish by my front door. I told him that once, years ago, in passing, he remembered. "I'm going to need you to get back here," Denise said. "I'm working," I said. "So is he," she said. "There's a booking checking in tomorrow at 3. I called my supervisor. I explained there was an emergency at my property and I needed to work remotely for the last 3 days of the trip and return home a day early. He said fine. I booked the earliest flight I could get, which was the next morning at 6. I set my alarm for 4:30. I did not sleep. Here's what I did instead of sleeping. I researched. I pulled up the relevant statutes for unauthorized subletting, impersonation, and forgery in my state. I looked up what constitutes criminal trespass when someone has a copied key. I documented the Airbnb listing's earnings estimate based on the nightly rate and number of nights booked. I wrote a timeline. I saved every screenshot, every building entry log screenshot Denise had texted me, every piece of correspondence I could find between me and Wade, going back 2 years, including the texts where he'd asked to stay and I'd said no. I also, very quietly, called a lawyer. A friend of mine from college had gone into real estate law. I texted her at midnight and she called me back in 10 minutes because she is the kind of friend everyone should have. She walked me through my options. She used words like conversion, which is the legal term for using someone else's property without permission for personal financial gain. She used the phrase forced authorization because Airbnb requires hosts to confirm they have the legal right to list the property, and Wade had confirmed that for a property he did not own. She said, "You have a very strong case, don't tip him off." I landed at 7:15 in the morning. I did not go to my apartment. I went to Denise's office. She had pulled everything. The entry logs, the building's exterior camera footage. We have cameras at the front entrance and the parking garage, and a list of complaints from 2 other residents about noise on the nights that corresponded with guest check-ins. She handed me a folder and said, "This is yours. I want to talk for a second about what it feels like to hold a folder of evidence against your own brother. I'm not going to pretend I was a machine about it." I sat in Denise's little office with the folder in my lap, and I thought about Wade at 8 years old teaching me how to ride a bike in the parking lot of our old church. I thought about the time he drove 4 hours when my car broke down during a road trip and didn't ask for gas money. People are not only one thing. I know that. But I also thought about every time I'd been flexible, every time I'd been understanding, every time I'd made space for, "That's just how he is." And I thought about the fact that he had walked into my apartment with a copied key and rented it to strangers for 9 days and pocketed the money and never said a word. I closed the folder. I thanked Denise. The new guests were checking in at 3. It was 9:15 in the morning. I went back to my apartment building, and I let myself in with my fob, and I stood in my living room for a minute. The pothos was still on the office windowsill. There was a coffee mug in the sink that wasn't mine. Someone had used my good olive oil and left the cap loose. Small things. But I stood there and I felt every one of them. I changed the fob code for my unit through the building system, which I could do as the owner. I called Denise and she updated the master system on her end. The copied key, whatever copy Wade had made, was now useless. Then I went to the Airbnb app, found the listing through the screenshots I had, and reported it to Airbnb's trust and safety team as an unauthorized listing of a property I owned with documentation attached. I uploaded the deed. I uploaded my ID. I uploaded screenshots of the entry logs and the discrepancy between the listed host and the actual owner. Airbnb's response was faster than I expected. Within 2 hours, the listing was suspended and I had an email confirming they were investigating. They also, and this is the part that matters, flagged the account associated with the listing and began a review of the financial transactions. I texted my lawyer friend the update. She said, "Good. Now go to the police. I want to be honest about something." I did not want to go to the police. Not because I doubted what Wade had done, but because once you bring law enforcement into something involving your family, you cannot unring that bell. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 20 minutes just thinking. I called my mother. I told her what I'd found. I want to be clear about this part. I gave my family the chance to make this right before I escalated. I called my mother and I told her what her son had done in my apartment for 9 days while I was working in Denver. She said, "Are you sure it was him?" I said, "His face is in the host profile photo, Mom." There was a very long silence. Then she said, "He probably needed the money. You know he's been struggling." And that was the moment I stopped trying to give anyone a chance. I drove to the police station. The officer who took my report was thorough. She went through everything methodically: the listing, the entry logs, the camera footage, the timeline, the Airbnb earnings. She asked me if I had any documentation that Wade had been told he could not use the property. I showed her the text thread. She photographed it. She asked if there was any written agreement or anything that could constitute implied permission. I said no. She made notes. Then she asked about the host confirmation on Airbnb, the part where the host confirms they have legal authorization to list the property. I explained that Wade had checked that box under a false name for a property he did not own, without my knowledge or consent. She looked up from her notepad and said, "That's fraud." Not my word, hers. The investigation took 3 weeks. I will skip the parts that are honestly just logistics and paperwork, not because they weren't important, they were, but because the part that matters is what happened when the detective assigned to the case called Wade in for a conversation. I know what happened in that conversation, because Wade called me afterward. It was the first time we'd spoken since I'd gotten home from Denver. He called me and I answered, and he didn't say hello, he just said, "You went to the police." "Yes," I said. "Over an apartment." "Over my apartment." There was a pause. "Then, I was going to pay you back." I had been prepared for this. I had actually thought about how I would respond to this exact sentence, and what I said was, "Wade, the money was never the only issue. You copied my key. You entered my property without permission. You used my property to defraud Airbnb and the guests who thought they were booking a legitimate listing. You checked a box that said you had legal authorization to list that property and you didn't. That is fraud. That is forgery. The detective is not calling you because of money. The detective is calling you because of what you did." He hung up. My mother called me 20 minutes later. She did not ask how I was. She said, "How could you do this to your brother?" Not a question, a statement. The kind of statement that's been aimed at me my whole life every time I've held a boundary with anyone in my family. I said, "Mom, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it." Wade walked into my home with a key he copied without my knowledge and rented it to strangers for 9 days while I was working out of state. He made money off my property, my mortgage, my HOA fees, my risk. He did this after I explicitly told him he could not stay there. There is camera footage. There are text messages. There is a police report. I did not do this to my brother. He did this to himself and to me. She cried. I let her cry. I did not apologize. The legal process is ongoing and I can't share every detail, but here's what I can tell you. Airbnb refunded the guests who had booked under the fraudulent listing. The account associated with Wade's fake profile was permanently banned. The financial transactions were documented as part of the fraud investigation. My building's HOA sent a formal notice of the unauthorized subletting incident for the record, though because I was the victim rather than the perpetrator, there was no penalty to me. As for Wade and me, we haven't spoken since that phone call. My mother still calls sometimes. The conversations are short and careful. She has not apologized. I have stopped waiting for her to. Here is what I want you to understand about why I'm telling this story. It's not because I want to talk about Wade. It's not even really about the apartment, or the money, or the Airbnb listing. It's about the moment in that hotel room in Denver when I looked at a photo of my own kitchen and had to make a choice. I could have called him and yelled and gotten emotional and given him time to disappear the evidence. I could have said nothing and just quietly stewed in it. I could have called my mother first and gotten pulled into the family orbit of, let's not make a big deal of this. Instead, I took screenshots. I called the building manager. I called my lawyer friend. I wrote a timeline. I documented everything before I made any moves because I knew that the feeling in my chest, that dropped floor sick feeling, was not going to serve me as well as the folder would. The folder served me very well. People always ask me, usually when I tell this story to friends, why didn't you say something sooner? Why didn't you say harder limits with your family years ago? And the honest answer is, I was afraid of being the difficult one. I was afraid of the phone call from my mom, the guilt, the being cast as the one who couldn't take a joke, who couldn't be flexible, who made everything a whole thing. What I learned is that people who benefit from your flexibility will always call your boundaries, making things a whole thing. The naming of it doesn't make it true. I still have the pathos. I moved it back to the bookshelf, and then after a week, I moved it back to the office windowsill because it genuinely does better there. Some things you figure out by accident. The apartment is mine. The lock code is something only I know. The spare key is somewhere Wade will never find it, and honestly, there is no one I would tell. If you have a Wade in your life, and I think a lot of you do, or you wouldn't have clicked on this, I want to say something directly. Documentation is not cruelty. Evidence is not betrayal. Protecting what you built is not an attack on the people who didn't build it with you. You are allowed to hold the line even when the person on the other side of it is someone you loved when you were 8 years old and they were teaching you to ride a bike. You are allowed to hold the line especially then, because those are exactly the people who know where the spare key is. I've thought a lot about what made this whole thing possible. Not the legal outcome, not the Airbnb investigation, not even the police report. But the moment in that Denver hotel room when I chose to take screenshots instead of making a phone call. That choice, that one small decision to go cold instead of hot, changed everything that came after it. And I don't think that was an accident. I think it was the result of years of quietly learning, often the hard way, that how you respond in the first 5 minutes of a crisis determines almost everything else. Wade didn't become who he is overnight. And honestly, neither did I. The version of me who saved for 4 years for a down payment, who kept a spreadsheet, who called a real estate lawyer at midnight and got a call back in 10 minutes because I'd spent years building the kind of friendships where that was possible. That version of me was built through a lot of unglamorous choices. Early mornings, canceled plans, rice and beans twice a week. Nobody sees that part. They see the folder you walk into the police station with, and they don't know about the 4 years of discipline that made the folder possible. What Wade did had a logic to it, even if the logic was wrong. He looked at my life and saw resources he didn't have, a property, a good income, time away. And he calculated that the gap between what was mine and what he could take was bridgeable by a copied key and a checked box on an app. He wasn't thinking about consequences, he was thinking about access. And the thing about people who think only about access is that they are genuinely surprised when the infrastructure they're exploiting has an owner who is paying attention. I was paying attention, not because I suspected him specifically, not because I'm paranoid, but because I've learned that the things you build require ongoing care. You don't just buy an apartment and stop thinking about it. You maintain it. You document it. You know who has keys. That's not paranoia. That's stewardship. And stewardship, I've come to understand, is a form of respect for your own work, for your own sacrifice, for the version of yourself who gave things up to build something real. The hardest part was my mother, not Wade. Wade made a calculation and it failed. My mother made a different kind of choice. She chose comfort over truth, family mythology over accountability, and that choice said something about a pattern that had been running my whole life. I've been accommodating that pattern since I was old enough to feel guilty about saying no. Ending it didn't feel powerful. It felt like grief. It still does, some days. But here's what I know now that I didn't fully understand before. Protecting what you build is not a selfish act. It is a moral one. The discipline that built it, the integrity that documented it, the courage that walked into that police station. Those are not just strategies. They are who you are choosing to be. And who you choose to be consistently over time is the only thing that actually determines what your life looks like. Wade is still out there, my mother still calls, the legal process is still running, and I am still here in my apartment, with my pothos on the office windowsill, living in something I built for myself. That's enough. That has always been enough.